Tare, a young woman with determination etched into her soul, was no stranger to hardship. Growing up in the vibrant yet economically challenged streets of Warri Delta State, she had long resolved to be the change her family desperately needed. Her father, once a thriving business owner, had been struck down by illness, leaving the burden of their survival on Tare's mother, who worked as a seamstress. Tare knew education was her golden ticket out of poverty, and she carried the weight of that responsibility like a crown. At Delta State University, Abraka, Tare's reputation for being the best in her law class wasn't surprising. She had no choice but to excel. In between lectures, she worked as a cashier at a local grocery store, her evenings spent helping her younger siblings with their homework. Every spare moment was devoted to her books, her dreams of a brighter future burning fiercely within her. But despite the pressures, she moved with grace and resilience, never complaining, only pushing forward. One fateful afternoon, as she was rushing to the library to catch up on some missed reading, she bumped into Jade, literally. He was tall, with deep brown eyes that seemed to look straight into her soul, and a confident smile that melted her usual guarded demeanor. Jade was an engineering student, well known on campus for his intelligence and charisma. He was the kind of person everyone wanted to be around, but few truly knew. Tare apologized quickly, embarrassed by the collision, but Jade only laughed it off, offering his hand to steady her. "No harm done," he said with a grin that made her heart skip a beat. From that moment, their paths became entwined. What began as casual conversations between classes soon turned into study sessions and late-night talks about their dreams. Jade, too, came from humble beginnings, and they bonded over their shared desire to escape the limitations of their circumstances. He admired her strength and drive, while she was captivated by his ambition and unwavering belief in their potential. He would often tell her, "We're gonna make it here, you and I, we're gonna change the world together." And she believed him. Their love blossomed like a flame that could not be extinguished. They supported each other in every way, Tare helping Jade through his tougher engineering courses, and Jade being her rock when the weight of her responsibilities became too heavy. In each other, they found not just romance, but partnership. They were unstoppable, or so they thought. One rainy evening, as they sat on the steps of the library, talking about their future, Tare received a phone call from her mother. The news was devastating. Her father's condition had worsened, and the family was on the verge of losing their home. For the first time in years, the ironclad resolve Tare had built around herself began to crumble. Jade, ever the optimist, tried to comfort her. "We'll figure this out, Tare. We always do." But the solution came from an unexpected place. A few days later, Tare received an email from a prestigious scholarship program in Canada. She had applied months ago, never thinking she'd be chosen. But here it was, a full scholarship to continue with her studies. It was everything she had ever wanted, except for one thing. It meant leaving Jade. Tare's heart ached as she weighed her options. Staying with Jade meant she would be giving up a life-changing opportunity, one that could provide her family with the financial stability they so desperately needed. But leaving him felt like tearing out a piece of her soul. Jade was her future too, wasn't he? The night she told Jade about the scholarship was one of the hardest in her life. They met under their favorite tree on campus, the place where they had shared their first kiss. The air was thick with unspoken words as she broke the news. "I don't know what to do, Jade," she said, her voice trembling. Jade was silent for a long time, staring at the ground. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "You have to go, Tare. This is your dream." Tare's eyes filled with tears. "But what about us? What if this changes everything?" Jade reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring, but there was a sadness in his eyes. It will change everything. But that doesn't mean we're over. We'll find a way. They spent that night clinging to each other, both knowing that no matter how much they wanted to believe they could make it work, the distance and time apart would be a heavy burden. When Terry left for Canada, their goodbye was heart-wrenching, filled with promises to stay in touch, to visit, to never forget what they had. But deep down, both knew the truth. Life was unpredictable, and the future they had imagined together might never come to pass. As Terry boarded the plane, her heart heavy with both hope and sorrow, she whispered a silent prayer, a prayer that their love, despite the distance, would survive the storm. And as Jade watched the plane disappear into the horizon, he wondered if he would ever see the woman who had captured his heart the same way again. The sprawling city of Toronto had become Tare's new home, a place that had shaped her into a different person, a stronger, more refined version of the girl who once walked the sun-drenched paths of Delta State University. After years of study and sleepless nights, she had built a reputation as a successful immigration lawyer, helping countless people navigate the complex systems that once bewildered her. She had made her mark, a testament to her hard work and resilience. Yet for all her success, there was a part of Terry that remained untouched by time. Late at night, in the quiet of a sleek apartment overlooking the city skyline, memories of Jade would resurface, unwelcome but persistent. She had tried to move on, dated a few men, even entertained the idea of marriage once, but no one measured up to Jade, the man who had loved her in her most vulnerable moments, the man who had believed in their future even when she couldn't. It was a late winter afternoon, the cold Toronto air biting through her coat as she walked out of the courthouse, when she received a message from an old friend, Asa. The name lit up her phone screen, bringing a warmth of nostalgia. They hadn't spoken in years, but Ace had been part of that tight circle at university, the one that knew her story with Jade better than anyone else. The message was brief but startling. "Hey Ter, long time no talk. Guess what? I just found out that Jade will be in Toronto for an engineering conference next week. Thought you should know. Maybe you two could reconnect." Ter froze, the world around her blurring as the name Jade took over her thoughts. She hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in years, hadn't allowed herself to think too deeply about him in all this time, and now suddenly he was going to be here in her city. Her heart raced as the memories flooded back. The way Jade used to laugh with his whole body, how his eyes sparkled with optimism when they talked about the future, and the feel of his hand in hers under the stars. But just as quickly the memories darkened, the tears she had shed as she left for Canada, the emptiness that had followed her as they drifted apart over the years, despite their initial promises to stay in touch. Tara leaned against a wall to steady herself, the busy city moving around her as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She had built a life here, had put all her energy into succeeding, and had pushed the memory of Jade into a corner of her heart where she didn't have to face the pain. And yet, even after all these years, the mention of his name had the power to unravel her. Was she ready to see him again? That night, Ter sat by the window of her apartment, staring out at the twinkling city lights, her thoughts heavy with the possibility of seeing Jade. What would he look like now? Had he changed? Was he married, with a family of his own? The thought twisted her insides. She had once imagined that family with him, the two of them raising children, building a life filled with love and laughter. She hadn't heard much about him after they lost contact, but she knew he had stayed in Nigeria. Last she heard, he had started his own engineering firm, and like her, had become quite successful. That knowledge had both comforted and saddened her. She was glad he had found his path, but the fact that they had done it apart still stung. The week passed in a blur of emotions and indecision. Ter tried to focus on work, but her mind was always elsewhere. What would she say to him? How would he react? Would they even recognize each other after all this time? She considered not going at all, avoiding the emotional whirlwind that was bound to come with seeing him again. But deep down, Tear knew she couldn't avoid it forever. She had carried the weight of their unfinished story for too long. She needed closure, whether that meant rekindling something or letting it go completely. The day of the conference arrived, and Tear found herself standing outside the venue, her breath visible in the cold February air. She wore a black coat, her hands nervously clenching the strap of her handbag. It felt surreal to be standing there waiting for a man she hadn't seen in nearly 7 years, a man she once thought she couldn't live without. Finally, she spotted him. Jade stepped out of the building, surrounded by a group of people all deep in conversation. Tear's heart skipped a beat. He looked just like she remembered, yet somehow different. Older, more refined, with a sense of maturity that hadn't been there before. His hair was neatly cropped, and his confident stride was unmistakable. He was the same Jade, but time had left its mark on him, as it had on her. For a moment, Tear considered walking away, disappearing into the crowd before he saw her. But just as she turned, Jade looked up, and their eyes met. Time seemed to stand still. His expression shifted from surprise to something she couldn't quite place. Recognition, nostalgia, and something deeper, something that mirrored the emotion swirling inside her. He smiled, that same warm, familiar smile that had once made her feel like everything would be okay. "Tear," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance between them. She took a deep breath and walked toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. As she got closer, she could see the same emotions flickering in his eyes, the mixture of joy, longing, and the weight of everything they had left unsaid. When they finally stood face to face, neither spoke for a moment. The years apart hung between them, heavy and unspoken. But in that silence, there was also something else, a connection that had never truly been broken. "You're here," Jade said, his voice soft, almost in disbelief. "I am," Tear replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think I'd come, but—" "I'm glad you did," he interrupted, his eyes never leaving hers. Tear's heart raced as the flood of emotions threatened to overwhelm her. She had spent years wondering if this moment would ever come, and now that it was here, she didn't know what to say. "Jade, she began, but the words caught in her throat. "Let's sit," he suggested, pointing to a nearby cafe. "I think we have a lot to talk about." As they walked side by side, 1,000 unspoken words lingered between them, but one thing was clear. Their story was far from over. Sitting across from each other in the warm, intimate corner of a bustling Toronto cafe, Tare and Jade exchanged nervous smiles as the memories of their past swirled around them. The rich aroma of coffee filled the air, but neither could focus on anything except the person sitting in front of them. It felt like no time had passed at all, yet so much had changed. Jade was different now, more poised, more confident, carrying an air of success that came with years of hard work. His once playful eyes now held a seriousness, though they still sparkled when he looked at her. Tear felt the same familiar warmth whenever he smiled, but she also saw the distance that life had carved between them. She had become someone different too, no longer the wide-eyed university student with dreams of lifting her family out of poverty, but a woman who had built a life of her own in a foreign land. They talked for hours, catching up on everything they had missed in each other's lives. Tear told Jade about her journey through law school, the challenges of making it in Canada, and how she had finally found her footing as an immigration lawyer. Jade listened attentively, his admiration for her clear in every word he spoke. "You've done so well, Tear," he said softly, his eyes locking onto hers. "I always knew you would." She smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "And you? I heard you started your own company?" Jade nodded. "Yeah, an engineering firm in Lagos. It wasn't easy, but I managed to grow it over the years. We're doing well now." He paused for a moment, his smile fading slightly. "But there's always been something missing." Tear felt her heart skip a beat. She knew where this conversation was heading, and part of her had been dreading it. She had felt the chemistry between them the moment their eyes met outside the conference, the same undeniable spark that had once made them inseparable. But things were different now. They were different.